This video is to talk about trip planning resources for the Alaska trip from Florida in summer of 2022. As you can see from the list attached, I started routing before the trip with maps from AAA, paper maps. And then on the trip I used satellite mapping, and I didn't list it here, but I used Google Maps, which, by the way, Google Maps is superior to satellite maps when you have cell access. The problem is on a remote trip like this, a lot of times you don't have cell access and you don't have Wi-Fi either. I found, generally speaking, that Wi-Fi did not work whenever I stopped on the road, and it worked when I was in hotels and Airbnbs usually, but I wasn't in those places very often. So what I found is I had to rely on Google Maps using cellular service, which I only had about half the time, and then I had to rely on satellite mapping. If you go back in some of my trip videos, you'll see me complaining about the satellite mapping. Even though it's indispensable when you don't have cell service, it's just not as powerful as Google Maps, and I ran into some issues with it. However, if you have it, it's great. It uses no data, of course, and will operate when you don't have cell service. So when I do have cell service or Wi-Fi, I can use these apps, and you can see the various apps listed below. iOverlander was far and away the most reliable and useful app for finding campsites, and you can see the asterisk next to that and a few others. Those were the ones that I used the most. The other one next to iOverlander in the United States is recreation.gov, which has a lot of public lands on it that you can make reservations or check the availability of campsites. iOverlander won't tell you availability, but it will tell you about the campsites and where they're at. Very, very useful. It's got more different varieties and locations of campsites than any place, I think. None of these apps are perfect. iOverlander has some reviews on it, and some of them are out of date, but it's a lot better than any other alternative. Campendium looked pretty good. I just didn't find that I needed it when I had iOverlander. Seeker is a newer one that some people think is going to take over and become better than iOverlander, but it just doesn't have enough data points in it yet. And another one I would specifically mention is iExit. If you use rest areas on the interstate like I do, I use them for taking breaks and walks, having lunch, and I even slept in several rest areas overnight. It will show you every exit on every interstate in the country. I found it really, really useful. Then, of course, toward the bottom of the list there you see I used Airbnb and Priceline quite a bit for finding lodging when I was not camping. So you can see the icons there. These are from my iPad screen, which I would tie into my iPhone hotspot. Always keep paper maps as a backup. Some of the above just don't work at different times, and you end up using those paper maps. And lastly, if you've watched my other videos, you know that I never made reservations for campsites. So the resources you might want to use may be different if you're making reservations ahead of time. You'd need to do some research on that.